John's on.
I'm just gonna push approval of the minutes then.
Hey guys,
Hey, John.
Hi.
So it's dark word.
There we go. Backlit.
How are you, John?
We are super dark.
Yeah. Oh, you're.
I'm good.
Good.
How about you guys?
Yeah,
Good.
good.
Don, are you there? Are you in New Mexico or where did you say you were going to be?
Nebraska.
Nebraska. I know you started with the N.
Oh, hey,
Magic.
Don. There you go.
Yeah, I am in Omaha,
Omaha.
looking out over the Missouri River, and had a beautiful air travel day in a wonderful air travel system. So, all right, April, I think it's your show, right?
4 o'clock.
There is.
Alright.
All right, guys, I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the monthly meeting of the Scarborough Town Council Communications Committee. Today is Wednesday, October 9th, and it is 4 p.m. I will do roll call in the room. April Seiler, John Anderson is here with us online, and Councilor Don Cushing also here with us online. And then we have Allison and Liam with us also. Item 3 is approval of the minutes. Unfortunately, the agenda reflects the July minutes and the September minutes didn't get attached to the packet. And so if it's okay with you guys, I'm just gonna push approval of those off for now. Just procedurally, let's just do it, you know, a little neater. And I apologize, I didn't realize that that was not correct when I approved the agenda, so that's on me. Item 4 is Town Council Communications Planning. Councilor Hamel submitted his Councilor Corner to Allison and I within the hour for October 15th. So pleased to report that one is all set. Jean Marie is slated to do the Councilor Corner for November 1st. And then we had discussed with 3 new councilors being elected for November 15th, that they kind of each get a paragraph feature for our November 15th Councilor Corner, unless someone has an updated suggestion or something else that you think could take priority. We could always do new council introductions in December if there's something else more pressing.
The one thing I was thinking maybe that I would be willing to do if we wanted to push them out was do a write-up on the Downs workshop and
Okay.
what we learned, because I think it was very informative and I think it would be good to kind of put something out about some of the key things that they shared and where we're going. So I'd be happy to write something on that one.
What's the timing of this is November?
November 15th.
15th.
Yeah, so sometime between now and then, I'm going to go over and have a chat with Peter Michaud. After the last meeting, I had a brief conversation with him in which we discussed that this particular report, because it was so positive, might be a good opportunity for a reset. And he agreed. And he said he would be happy to hear my thoughts, question his judgment, but he said he was interested in hearing my thoughts. And so you don't have to ask me twice. So I thought I'd go over and visit with him a little bit and see what they might be up to and what they might be willing to do to get this to a place where it's not just economically beneficial to the town, but that it's something that we feel as good about as I think we should.
Yeah. And that's kind of the spirit of the article I would want to write, is just, you know, there's so much to celebrate, but I think also acknowledging that still people are unhappy with growth and like the fact that there are a lot of great things, but we're kind of contending with those two different perspectives. And so it's just really, to me, I think, you know, there were a lot of good things that were shared that I think we just owe it to the public to make sure that they get that information. And I do like the idea of, you know, part of the conversation that we talked about with them was how do we better partner between the town and them? And I don't think it had, like, I almost took away that they wanted us to lead it. And I don't think it's necessarily for the town to lead. I think it's a partnership between the town and the Downs to work together with both staffs to make sure we have a clear plan of communicating all the things that are happening in the Downs and how that's part of our, you know, it's a strategy we have that's going to help with affordability, address the housing, like it's just, it checks a lot of boxes, but it also does kind of check a lot of things that I know people aren't happy with too.
Yeah, I think that's just right, John. I think that's what really, you know, he was saying to me, well, what do you want us to do? I said, well, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to have that conversation. So I think you're absolutely right that it's both of our jobs, and therein lies the opportunity. So I agree with you completely.
So April, would you like me to do that for the 11:15, or I can
Yeah,
also
I
wait
think
till
that's a-
12:01?
No, I think let's, I mean, we were already kind of pushing it with the 11:15 deadline for newly electeds. And so I think that's great. If that way we're not up against the time deadline in that same way. And so, and I don't want the workshop to get too far into our past before we call attention to it. So I think that's a great suggestion.
I'll also add that I'm working on the 10:15 newsletter right now, and I am doing a recap of that workshop, just more briefly informational, summarizing that happened. So I want us to continue the conversations, and I kind of cover that in my update, but I think it'll still be relevant then if we kind of keep that ball rolling.
Mhm.
And I'll just want to make sure that we not necessarily align, but like we don't have to be redundant, and like I can be giving more of the informational update, and yours is more like the perspective of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, okay, so I will propose that, or, you know, at the very least, make that recommendation to the full council when I give my update next week. Other council communications planning, we were gonna try and have one more Counselor Corner Live on the topic of prioritizing our priorities. I've already kind of soft launched it a couple of times just to different people that I know would be interested in participating in the conversation. And so really, as long as you guys are still on board, we really just need to kind of look at the calendar here and see what's reasonable in terms of if we can get it in before the election.
I think that might be a for promoting it, but not to say it can't happen.
Okay. I mean,
I guess if we're picking a date now, I could have it in the newsletter.
yeah,
I think we could target the 24th of October. Because we usually do these on Thursdays, right? Is that usually? We have our finance committee meeting tomorrow to really look at the modeling. And so I think hopefully we will be, I think this one's going to require some more setup maybe than some of the other ones where we can show some of the modeling, what it means, get feedback. It might be good to think through to like structurally, like what I would love to kind of see is some conversation in small groups of like people talking about, you know, we have different scenarios, like what did they like, what did they not like, what would they change, so that maybe we leave there with not a collective agreement on what the plan is, but other things we need to work on to produce a recommendation. And I think figuring out how to do like small groups would be cool.
okay. Alternatively, we do have a 5th Wednesday this month. So Wednesday, October 30th. And there's nothing on the town calendar for that night. So if we wanted to get ourselves a little more time, we could.
I would prefer that actually.
Yeah, propose Wednesday, the 30th, since we have that extra night that weekend night, or weekday night this year.
We'd have to have that in council chambers as opposed to public safety.
Yeah.
Because public safety set up for voting.
Yeah. And also just kind of, you know, building on the feedback and the lessons learned from hosting these, you know, put some more careful thought into the room setup. To your point, John, if you want to do small groups or kind of wrap our heads around how to do breakout groups. Just, I don't want to sit behind the dais. And so just making sure that we communicate the room setup ahead of time to make it feel like more of a discussion and less kind of like we're up front.
Mhm. Yep, that works. I can, after we have finance tomorrow, maybe send a proposal to this group of like how we would want to organize, structure a session and use that as like a sounding board that could help with room setup, as well as just getting people's feedback on what we want to get out of this. I'm kind of interested to see what happens tomorrow in finance, because that may inform other things we may want to do. So Don, as we meet tomorrow to look at the modeling with different folks, think about Counselor Corner and like how we may want to use that as a vehicle for the next step to more engage the public on something.
Yeah. You know, it's an interesting question. It's sort of, to me, it folds back into, I guess, having a better handle on budget numbers, because what we're really talking about is the first question we need to ask is, what do we need to spend to keep this show on the road? You know, we've just approved personnel budgets all the way around that have significant increases in them, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we have normal cost, and then we stop that, and then you say, okay, now what's left? What do we have to work with? And I don't know that we've ever seen that number. You know, do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, it's like, okay, now we've got all of our bills paid. I think somebody was offended when I suggested that, you know, okay, now where can we go? Can we afford a vacation and where can we go? But what I was really meaning to say was that when you begin to set priorities on new stuff, you have to have a handle on what's the run rate, as they say in, you know, business parlance. And so I think I just have trouble when I think about talking to the public about our priorities. Not sure where I saw this. I saw this in a poll question the other day. They basically said, maybe it was on it was on sustainability. It was one of our website things. It said, look, if you had 200 grand to spend, what would you
Open space
spend?
plan. Yeah.
On the open space plan, right? And
Yeah.
I thought that was a great question, because it put it in terms of saying, look, our resources here are not unlimited, and that's what setting priorities is all about. And so maybe without knowing what those numbers are, that might be a way of approaching it, is to sort of give people some parameters to say, there really are constraints here. We can't do everything. And so given that, where do you stand? So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting to gather feedback. This is one of those times when I think we can get out ahead of a narrative. So I think it would be really interesting at the Counselor Corner Live to gather feedback on what the community is expecting to see in our decision-making as we prioritize our priorities. Like, if they only care about the tax impact, then obviously tax impact modeling, you know, is something that we're very familiar with. But how do we break that down and make that and give them just the nuts and bolts that they're looking for? Or if we find out that their priorities lie elsewhere in terms of how we make our priorities, you know, or how we decide when to bond, like that would be interesting feedback just in terms of getting our arms around. Because, you know, the criticism we get is that, and as you know, especially now with the $6 million land bond, is that the public is feeling like these things just keep coming and coming and coming, and that the actual request is the land bond, and then it's the school, and then it's the community center, and then it's the next thing. And so it's not really $6 million, it's $296 million. And I read that and was like, whoa, okay. Like that, there's something to the way people are thinking if we all see this as compartmentalized, but they don't.
Yeah,
Right.
it's hard, it's tough because I think some of it is like too, this was the conversation we had at our finance meeting that, again, I go back and forth, right? Like, what is our responsibility in timing things based on our role versus our responsibility when something is ready to ask the public if this is the right time? Because again, everything we put out there, we don't control the outcome, they do.
Right?
The only thing we control is when it gets on the ballot. And if we're withholding something from them from making that choice, you know, principally, is that our job? And do they want us to like be making those choices on their behalf? Or is it our job to make sure the work was done, that the information is available for them to then make the choice? And so that was discussed, and I don't know where I feel on that, but I do want to hear from the public of, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to make the decision for you? Because it may be a decision you don't like, and then I'm preventing you from making a choice. But if you want me to do that, I'm happy to do that. But, you know, then you have to give me that ability to do that. And I don't know if people,
Well, see, that's interesting because that's where I came down with taking two separate questions around bond issues. Question one, does this pass the straight face test that it's not going to break the bank, it's, you know, well presented, etc. We're not saying it's a good idea or not, or where it fits in our priorities. We're just saying that if the town, you know, if the town wanted it, you know, we could afford it, basically. But that's not to say we recommend or don't recommend it. And then I think it is a separate question and an important question to say, to your point is, you know, do you want to know where we stand on this? To say, you know, I think it's reasonable for the council to actually say, let's just pretend we're the landlord. Look, we don't see any reason why the town can't handle this, but based on our understanding of the current situation and so on and so forth, we don't think you should do it, but it's up to you. And I think more and more that becomes important, and that cuts to what you're saying, John, is that it's not like, well, you know, they don't have to abdicate the responsibility and say, you decide. But I think it's a legitimate question to ask people to say, where do your elected representatives stand as a body on some of these critical issues? I know people disagree with me about that, but that's remains my opinion on the big important stuff. I don't think we need to weigh in on the fire truck or, you know, those kinds of things, but new initiatives, probably.
Okay, so I captured some of our questions and some of the things that we would like to focus on. I'll be interested to see how finance goes in terms of what comes out of that conversation and what materials you think maybe we'll be able to provide, or visuals or something. And then maybe talk more about how to format the room to make it conducive to better discussion. But if we're all kind of aligned, then let's shoot for October 30th. And we'll have Allison put that in the October 15th newsletter to promote it. And then we'll go from there.
Do we do 6 p.m. or 6:30?
Do you guys have a preference? I don't.
6 o'clock, it works.
Okay. The only other bit of business that comes to my mind for council communications is the ballots. I'm sure you guys saw Tom's email. The ballots were corrected really quickly. As of noontime yesterday, the municipal ballots were available. And so I am more than happy to do a quick video, just like I usually do, touting the hours that early voting is available. and make sure people know it's at the Public Safety Building, and then give everyone the, hours for voting for in-person voting on the day of the election. As long as you guys don't have an objection to that general video. And then Allison had also requested, some counselor for land bond videos. Have you guys coordinated on that?
Mhm. I'm gonna
Okay.
try and go to Higgins Beach parking lot and we'll send it to you, Allison.
Oh, okay, you're good doing it on your own.
Mhm.
I have
Did
two in my,
Karen, is
Sorry.
Karen doing it too, or just you, John?
I was just gonna do the Higgins Beach one. I don't know if I know she was interested in doing one, but she said she might need your help.
Okay,
I have one from Fuller Farm and another one from the Eastern Trail. And I wasn't particularly happy with the me part of it. But yeah, yeah. Yeah, I had this thought that I would, I would do the little explanation and then cut it up with pictures that I took and, and then after I'd done videos of walking across the bridge on the Nonsuch River, I realized, oh my goodness, I didn't hold the phone in a landscape and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but I'll try to send those along if I can get them in some format that doesn't embarrass me. Okay,
yeah, that'd be great, and I'm happy to do some editing too.
there you go. Okay, good. So expect to see those sometime before the election. When do you need?
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other council communications topics? That you guys need to or want to discuss for today?
I still have questions about the ballot snafu, because it didn't make sense to me that I'd like to understand how the printer made an error. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think, honestly, I'm very, very happy it resolved itself quickly. But given the current context, that was a big near miss because of all of the hoo-ha or hoopla around election integrity and so forth, that any little detail we miss has the potential for fairly significant negative impact. I don't think this one did, but I think that lessons learned around this would be useful to understand. So that's the circumstances confused me. That, in my world, you send a proof copy to the printer, you sign off on it, and then they print what you send them. And so I'm trying to understand what the printer did after that to rearrange the order of the candidates. So
We can
Somebody-
follow up with you, Councilor Christian.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on in our agenda, item 5 is town staff communications update.
I have a couple updates. Firstly, just my focus has been on the election communications, and I covered this last time, but now that we're starting to roll it out, I'll just do a recap of it. So,
Yeah.
sorry.
Is that this one?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the one.
Okay.
So right now, the content that I've been focusing on is around this early voting that just started this week, some of the changes that needed to be made quickly because of that, but kind of getting in that cadence of reminding people when to come and where. And then candidates night happened September 25th, so just redirecting people to that and reintroducing the candidates. And then the 3 referendum items have been my major area of focus. So I've worked with police and fire and got them each to do a video with me, and I'm trying something new this time where I am doing it in like a Instagram reel format, so it is that vertical portrait orientation and keeping it to a minute, whereas with like the budget videos, I've been traditionally doing landscape and like 2 to 3 minute long videos. So I'm trying to make this one more social media first. And that has been going well so far. So I just launched the police one last week and then the fire one this week. I'm trying to keep it in separate cadences so they don't kind of all get jumbled together. And then once I get these land bond clips from you all, I'll do that one probably towards the end of October just to space it out. But those are going well, just like capturing it in more of a creative way. But with each of those, we also have an article that has gone out in the Leader. The fire one's going next week. Police are already happened. And those are all available on a new web page that we put up live every election cycle. So the clerk's office has their own web page where they have more of like the specific details around voter registration. And then I've also been doing a separate election page on the what's happening with all the projects. That kind of breaks it down into more detail and where I can just put all this content. So those videos are up there, the Leader articles are up there. And then when I put them in the newsletters, I've been linking back to that webpage. Other than that, yeah, just a couple more graphics on social media that just kind of draw the eye and other ways of putting it up there. And then consistent in the newsletters, but we also have our voter guide that goes out at the end of the month. So it's a Wednesday, the 23rd. So April mentioned that video. I think that would be a good place to have that front and center. It's what we normally do. And then that would be my goal for the land bond video to have that ready to include in that. So I want to be able to put all of this content in one central place at that point. Does anyone have questions about election communications or other ideas that I should be thinking of?
What I've seen so far looks great, Allison.
Great.
Agreed.
So just the other major areas, aside from the regular, are largely from last week's council meeting. So I just also want to be able to put out more of this Downs messaging. We've shied away from it to this point, but I think now that there's some data backing it up, there's a fiscal impact model that we can reference. There is more of this angle that we can take as the town to be able to share out a message that's not as much taking their updates and also sharing them out, but doing our own angle of like how the town fits into that. So we're going to be working more on our approach for that, what our specific messages are. And so it's not something that I am doing this summary coming right up, but this is more thinking long-term about what our approach will be to communicating about that and working with them. And then as far as the Gorham Connector, we just want to be able to recap. That's another one where I haven't really been documenting it the whole way, but now that with the withdrawal that happened last week, I want to be able to kind of share out and use that as a positive attribute to the public process and how that happened. So I just want to be able to do a summary article about that. So that's going to be my more immediate area of focus before the Downs update.
Can I just
Yeah.
touch? Yeah. So, with regard to the Downs, we also picked up on that comment from the developers about maybe not being, in their opinion, as effective at communicating out kind of the positive aspects of that project. I think that the thing that is appropriate for the town to weigh in on and do some communication on is really, when we went into that project, really the decisions of the council were certainly the TIF, expanding the TIF, and the credit enhancement agreement. And that's really where there was a lot of public focus over the course of the Downs project is, scrutinizing or being concerned with what that agreement required. So at the onset, and for the last 6 years, there's been a lot of hypotheticals discussed about what the financial benefit would be to the town with this development. And I think where we're at now with this refined cost benefit or analysis or cost to serve analysis is we do have some very good data to suggest that there is a positive impact to the community by virtue of this development. And so I think we are extremely cognizant and cautious about we're not the marketing arm of a private development, but where there are town decisions being made in reference to that, and some, I think, noteworthy data to report out on, which we think is positive. We certainly sees that or see that as an opportunity to do some communication on moving forward. So that's sort of where we kind of draw the line for our standpoint. And I think Allison will be working on an article that speaks to those, certainly in the context that we just got an update, but here are some of the key takeaways from that. And here's an update on the larger project. So that's how we kind of see that message being sent. And certainly welcome any feedback or thoughts the council has on it, but from a staff standpoint, that's the angle, I guess.
I also think, sorry, from the Gorham, like for the Gorham connector, that seems to me like an article. We can summarize that and take that narrative. The Downs update, I'm thinking of it more as a series, like an ongoing communications tactic. It's not going to be one summary article and then we're moving past it. It's thinking of a strategic message that we're incorporating kind of consistently throughout our communications on an ongoing basis.
I was thinking like, is it a Downs series or is it more a series on growth management and how we are, executing the growth management strategy, with the Downs being one pillar of that? Because I feel like that's kind of the big picture around this is like, this is one thing we've decided to do that the town invested in, where we are getting the right outcomes as part of our overarching growth management strategy. And, this was good, smart land use planning that I think other towns would benefit from learning from. Doesn't mean you like it, because not everybody likes it, but it is, smart growth.
I think that is exactly right, John, is that the TIF and the CEA were strategies to achieve goals. And in this particular case, it was saying, here we have some land that can serve our goal of making housing available, but concentrating the density, doing it in a way that says, yeah, we can't stop growth, but we can manage it. And so to your point that, it's larger than the Downs. It is implementation of an ongoing strategy to achieve something that everybody in town wants. And they may not understand exactly how this helps, but I think what we just learned is it did. I mean, when I asked him, what they say, 3,500 people in 2.5 square miles versus, whatever the density is in the, I don't know, Scarborough was the largest township in the state. And, we have 18,000 people spread out over that geography. So those kinds of things, I think, are important to remind the public that the whole scheme here wasn't to add a few tax dollars to the town rolls. So I guess I'm just underscoring your point, John.
I agree with that, John. I think tying it back to a bigger picture, and anytime we can kind of connect these dots with some themes, I think is important. I think the a specific, in this case, kind of singular one-off article from a staff perspective is to try to specifically address, certainly report out on the Downs update, but specifically address some of the larger concerns with that development and placing it, and I agree, placing it within the larger context of smart and deliberate growth management, I think is important. But for me, it's I kind of see this strategic communication big picture as, you're putting out articles on various subjects with a common theme throughout them. And so I think making sure that that's not lost or not overlooked is important.
Yeah.
And while I'm thinking of it, I was really impressed when we went out there and saw that they were basically taking, areas that were drainage areas really, and turning them into little ecosystems that either added or replaced wetland area. And I think that they really did go above and beyond there. And that is a shining example of development that happens within the context of our sustainability and our conservation goals. So I think, that's another thing you can say about that particular project is that they really have been, in some ways, enhancing the environment, you could argue. Unless I'm missing something.
No, and I think that that's something that I hope that they are sharing out. I think there are a lot of great stories to come out of that development. I think from our perspective, we're looking at what the touch points are for kind of the municipal government side. And that's sort of our purview. And there's again, a whole nother big picture about the development itself. But and then if I could just quickly touch on the Gorham Connector, I know that the council had some very well attended meetings on that. And some of the sentiment that I heard that, again, I think it's important to place it within, I think, a more accurate context is, I see the Gorham Connector process as, a concept was brought forward to a prior council, and the council supported the sort of the objectives of that proposal, to mitigate traffic congestion, to try to deal with a longstanding issue. They expressed support for that. And then, of course, when the details came out, and something really concrete for people to respond to, there was a very robust public outcry and comment on that. That council listened to the public, there's participation, and then the council showed their ability to adapt and respond to the feedback. And so I know that throughout that process, there's always I think the comments from the public about, the council's not listening, you're tone deaf, how could you ever express support for this concept? And I think at the end of the day, this was another thing, while uncomfortable at times, was a good public process. And so I think there's a story to be told there with the eye of, I think, having greater confidence. And this is how, in this case, municipal government and process should work. Agreement in principle, details come forward, public has ability to respond, and then the council takes that feedback into consideration and makes an appropriate decision. And so I want there to be some communication on that process from that perspective. That's, again, my thought on it.
Well, Liam, I'm fine with that as long as there is no ambiguity about where this council stood on this issue, that we withdrew our support. And I think that there were some who wanted to equivocate around that. And that's, to my mind, not the case. And one of the reasons I feel strongly about this is that part of this issue was that the MTA, in my view, was very disingenuous in their approach to this whole thing. It became very clear to me at a period of time where we were just another hoop for them to jump through, as opposed to a community whose needs needed to be understood and regarded. And as long as we have an entity that is going to behave that way, I don't care if it's a new fire hydrant. I think they're going to get resistance. So I want to underscore that and to make absolutely certain that there's no misunderstanding about what the intent of the council is. And if there is internally some questions about that, then those questions need to be asked in a public forum, and we need to provide some clarification. That's my, so I'm not disagreeing with you, but I have some sense that that this would like to be perceived as grayer than it is.
Well, again, I think that the underlying theme for me is confidence and trust in the process. How often do people hear the council how often do you hear the council doesn't listen? And that's not the story here. And so I think when we have very concrete examples of a good public process in which the council listened to their constituents and made a decision or a different decision, I don't want that to be lost. And so that's the strategic communication piece I want to make sure we underscore and seize the opportunity.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I completely agree with that. And you've heard me say that publicly as recently as the last meeting. And that, we've had people come to the podium and say, well, you're not listening to us. Well, pay attention. We are listening. Here's the evidence. I think you're absolutely correct on that.
The one thing I would just want to add, going back to the Downs update, again, if you are going to incorporate stuff around TIF CEAs, you might want to include a spoiler that we are in process of updating our TIF CEA policy to talk about affordable housing, which again wasn't always clear, and so that just might be something as like a little bullet point to add into that update.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments on staff communication update? You all set, Elsie?
Yes,
One
thank you.
one question, is there going to be an article in the 1015 newsletter on the piping plover ordinance changes? Because again, I just want to make sure that that's being promoted and out there as something that's in the works, and we're going to have a public hearing coming up, because again, I want to make sure people are aware that the changes are taking place.
I reached out to Jamie about it, so I'm sure I'll be hearing back from her. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good catch, John, because we did, leadership met before this meeting and we talked about how the public hearing for the plover ordinance is going to be on our next agenda. And how to maybe generate some more interest around hearing from people that we haven't heard from yet. Not that I would ever want to discourage anyone from taking the podium, but the whole point of adding process to that was to make sure that we captured people's voices, and if the same 5 people show up, then I'm not sure that we will have effectively done that.
Yeah, it kind of is like a carry on from that Gorham Connector piece, right? Like we're saying, hey, we want your feedback. We're creating extra process so that you have the opportunity. We've shown in the Gorham Connector, we take your feedback seriously. So please give us feedback.
Yep, I think that's a great catch. Okay. Next agenda item, these next 2 are really kind of just, I'm looking to the committee for some conversation and some guidance on what you guys think is the best way to move forward. I think one of the themes that I'm sensing from various conversations and from watching other committees is this sense of putting some more things in writing in terms of council policies and procedures. And I know back when we first started talking about developing some more communications policy language, we had talked about, does that come from this committee as a recommendation to the full council, who would then send it to rules and policy? How tight do we want to be on language? Do we want to leave it up to rules and policy to develop that language? And so I kind of wanted to just carve out a few minutes here to give me some more direction on a path forward. Because we're wrapping up here on our committees and we're going to have all new committees sitting before we can catch our breath. And so what I don't want is the good work and kind of this continuity idea to get lost as we reshuffle our committees.
Well, I'll go first. I think that that we really do need to get a little more formal about defining the roles of the chair, the vice chair, the leadership team, the process of agenda setting, and the role of the rest of the council in terms of that. Because I think that, it's worked pretty well up till now. But frankly, it was a point of confusion to me over some time. And my opinion, after chatting with John a little bit about this, is that that is more the purview of the Rules and Policy Committee, because I think that's where that stuff emanates from. I believe it's chapter 302 of the ordinances, somewhere in there, that that defines all this stuff, and that needs to get a second look. So that's my opinion.
Were you talking to your question, April? Was it kind of more like, I was thinking differently. I was thinking more, is this more about things like Counselor Corner Live and Counselor Corner
Yeah.
and how we want to make that more
So-
memorialized as well?
Yeah, so it's two things. So specifically as it applies to the communications committee. So do
Mhm.
we want to make a recommendation to rules and policy that says we need to have language around who speaks to the press? Do we want to have rules and policy look at our communication outside of public meetings? Do we want to have rules and policy set up how we communicate with staff, or what the role of a define the role of a liaison? And whether or not committees will have their own email addresses, like what is our purview? I guess I'm asking a bunch of different questions, so I understand why
Mhm.
it wasn't necessarily clear what I was asking. I would like to make a recommendation from this committee as it applies to strictly communication topics for things that I would like to see rules and policy take up. But I'm not sure whether that recommendation whether you guys feel like that recommendation needs to start with us and go to the council and then go to rules and policy, or whether we can just make some informal suggestions and hope rules and policy rolls with it. Because if you haven't served on communications, it might be really challenging to get to the heart of what we view as the reason for our request.
Yeah, I think we're probably at a point, because this committee has been around for only a few years, right? Like it wasn't always there. I think it's important maybe that we try and document some of the ways we operate and what we do, to then ask the question, does this need to be memorialized more formally in our rules and policy so that it's clear? Like I agree with you in terms of some of those things, like speaking to the press. Like what I've seen happen a couple times, but not always consistently, is when somebody is asked to speak to the press, they send an FYI out to all the council. I think it's good practice that if anybody wants to speak to the press, that they, one, let everybody know, just to give a heads up. Like, I'm not going to stop anybody, but again, also to make sure that they know that when you speak to the press, and this is the sticky part, like if it's if you're sharing your opinion, you're sharing your opinion as a counselor, not as the council. But if we voted on something like the Gorham Connector, you're okay to say we, the council, voted against the Gorham Connector because of certain reasons, or I don't know. Like I think it's okay to put some parameters around that. I think things like Counselor Corner articles, like we talked about, I think it would be good to say, look, these aren't intended to be political, they're intended to be informative. We're looking to make sure that, while you can always share your opinion in them, we're trying to use these to help inform the public of things that are happening, and we want to make sure that it's not, being disrespectful to anybody or anything. Like things that sound a little silly as I say that we need to put on paper, but I feel like if we don't, then we run into situations where perhaps somebody could do something like that. So I would have no problem with us recommending something, but I do think I think we can recommend a recommendation, or maybe list things that we think could be explored for either the next comms committee to take on to better refine, or to send to rules and policy as potential agenda items that they may want to take up when they form.
I think that's all good. I think, when I look at it, there are categories of things. One is crisis communication. I mean, we've been fortunate that we haven't had anything really terrible, but we could have. And it is reasonable in a crisis for the public to look to their community leaders to what's to moderate the effects. I don't know how to say it, but what said it in another way, what they don't want to see is what appears to be a free-for-all or a gap or a gap in communication. And I can tell you after a year, I have no clue, even after serving on the communication committee for a year, I have no clue what would actually happen if we had a crisis. Okay, who would speak for the council, if anybody, etc. So that's one category. Then I think the other category, John, that you referred to is who represents the decisions of the council, things that we have voted on. So you mentioned the Gorham Connector. And then I think the gray area, which happens around Council Corner, is the council trying to fairly represent issues to the public as opposed to trying to persuade the public one way or another, you know, mom and apple pie thing. So to say that we are actively seeking community involvement, I don't think is a controversial issue. I think I've sort of wrote about that one way or another a couple of times to talk about what we are doing with respect to sustainability and those kinds of things. So the fact that factual, and I think that it is important to codify that and to make it clear to individual counselors that if you want to make a political statement, write a letter to the editor. Don't use this space for it. So those are kind of the three categories. I think it would be useful to have a conversation about that and to get something in writing. So as I frequently do, I'm agreeing with you, John, just with a different approach.
I like the three I wrote down opinions, decisions, and crisis. Like, what do we do? How should we be operating in those situations? So I think that's worth potentially revisiting. Oh,
the
there it
last
is.
one, which is not to be lost, I guess, is at least a discussion around those emails that come to all of us. And how do we at once make sure that everyone who addresses us gets some kind of a response, and at a minimum, and without inhibiting any individual from responding directly. So, because I think one potential there is you get that classic jump ball where nobody calls for it. And the person who took the time and energy to respond basically got a goose egg, and they say, you people don't care. And I don't
Yeah,
think
I do think that happens. Yeah.
So I just brought up on the screen, this is chapter 302, which is the town council rules and procedures. And so there is some reference to individual opinion disclaimers, council correspondence policy. Going back to the conversation we had at the onset of our committee year, I would suggest that rules and policies with a recommendation from the Communications and Community Engagement Committee look at these sections, and that's where I would suggest some work could be done to codify those expectations. So anyway.
Okay, I know we've had the conversation kind of piecemeal, and so before this committee wraps as the three of us, I just want to know what, if any, actionable item we kind of want to leave or put forward, so that this conversation doesn't just die if the three of us are not on communications next month or two.
I would put that in the category of unfinished business. I mean, I think we've talked about it, but we haven't moved it to a point where the balance of the council can deal with it. And my sense is the consensus here is that we all believe it's important and it needs more work.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I see 5 things. So I see opinions, decisions, crisis, emails. And I do think we should address that, emails to committees as a communications, and just make sure if that's something the next council wants to discuss. My opinion, I think I've shared my opinion in the emails with residents when they've expressed it, that I feel like I prefer to keep the council liaison and staff liaison managing communication, so it doesn't fall on volunteers. But I think having a more bigger conversation, if other people think differently, to just run that one to ground, I think is worth just.
Yeah, my preference would be to include that in our discussion points for rules and policy. If for nothing else, then a public discussion is had about how we all view that role as a liaison and what the
Mhm.
liaison's responsibility is. And then if the people want to, if the public wants to come and make public comment, that would be a good opportunity for residents that maybe would be more engaging than just sending us an email and kind of individually getting back to them and saying, no, I think this liaison thing is fine.
Yeah.
I do think that that's something that not everybody agrees on. And so that's definitely on my short list too, John, of just, I think it warrants a public conversation.
I agree.
Okay. And then last, for unfinished business, the Counselor Corner Live description and template. I just dropped the ball. I don't have anything to present in terms of showing anything to you guys. I think the Counselor Corner Live that we're doing, I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around. Writing a description is easy, but coming up with like a formulaic, step-by-step how to run a Counselor Corner Live is not so easy, because each one of them has been different and has met the community at a different point, and the facility is not always the same. And so I guess I'm struggling a little bit with how to kind of formalize that document and make it something that I guess would just live in the communications subcommittee folder that future committees could use as a resource.
Well, I think, April, what we've learned about the Counselor Corner Live is that they are forums to listen, have a dialogue, and for, at a minimum, the counselors to come away with a better understanding of how people feel about various issues and new ideas. I think that to the extent that you're explaining and educating and communicating takes place within the context of being able to have that kind of a discussion. And that, that stood out in the school. It stood out, I think that was sadly the only one I attended, but based on the feedback from the others, the format was different. I mean, I think, for example, John, when you and I went out to what's the name of that community we visited?
Hillcrest.
Hillcrest, yeah. It was that kind of thing, and I think we got a lot of decent feedback from it. So my advice, April, would be, if you feel like you need to set something down, I think that describing the purpose and the goals and suggesting that some of the methods that have worked are, but I think that each topic, sort of has its own nuances, and there isn't a set of rules right or wrong. I think sometimes it may very well be appropriate to say, we're doing this to tell you stuff, okay, and then we're going to listen after. But so I guess that would be my advice, is that it shouldn't take more than a paragraph or two to capture what it is that forum is about.
Okay. All right. Any other comments, John?
No, I mean, I
Here.
think I agree with Don. I think maybe capturing the spirit of what we're trying to do as but the method may need to look slightly different based on what we're trying to do for that particular one. And even like some of the stuff that staff does when they do their like when you guys did the open space meeting and things, like these are all good public engagement practices for dialogue. This is just one unique one that we sponsor, that we plan, that we execute on, but it's similar conceptually of like, we want feedback, we want to hear, we want to listen, and you know, it's just this committee kind of takes ownership of our part for our particular event.
You know, April, I ran into Dana the other night at Pat's,
Yeah,
and she reiterated her desire to be helpful. So if you get stuck, you could probably call her up, and she might be able to, you know, save you some time.
that's a good point. She's a really good resource. Okay, with that, guys, I don't have anyone in the room to make public comment. There's nobody online, and so at this point, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Not quite yet. I have one more thing, if we
Oh,
could.
sure.
I just would like to say you all saw the information on new counselor orientation that I put
Yes.
forward. I don't know whose job it is. I know that I did a little research, and there are other towns that do this. I think it's really important. I think that, you know, we have 4 candidates. I don't know who the 3 will ultimately be, based on what I've seen. You know, a couple of them are probably old hands at this type of thing, and a couple of them aren't.
Sure.
So I just don't want that to fall by the wayside, but I'm kind of done with it. I've made the point. I've offered, I think, what are as many suggestions as I can think of, and it's either a good idea or it's not. So I just want
Sure. So to speak to that briefly, just I think that since you emailed it to me, I'm not sure that I think that is communications committee work necessarily. I think that that's probably the decision of the future council leadership to figure out how we're going to do our onboarding. But I think that the document you sent has tons of value, and I absolutely, the town manager has it, the assistant town manager has it. I would definitely encourage whoever ends up in council leadership to really have that focus on onboarding and apply some of the things, or if not all of the things from the document you sent. I think it's
Okay.
top of mind for all of us who have been around a while now.
Yeah, it's easy to take for granted.
Yeah,
Like
that's
I
it, totally.
remember
Yep.
when I first, like I was reflecting on that too, and I was like, gosh, when I first started, I was in that bucket of like knew nothing, and
Yeah.
4 years of
Yeah.
working, now I understand stuff, and I want to make sure that new people, especially those that really probably aren't going to be ready to hit the ground running, get the support they need by us as a council to help make sure that they have a proper experience. Some of this, though, does require them to make effort themselves, right? Like a lot of the stuff you had done, a lot of it is stuff you need to read. You need to read and you need to digest. And maybe we should say, go read the comp plan, but then sit with a counselor and have a conversation about it and like talk about what it means to you. And because again, it's like one thing to read it,
Yes.
it's another thing to like digest it.
Well, when I looked at all of that stuff, I realized that I had read every one of those documents, and I read them when I discovered they existed in relationship to something that was in front of me at that time. And so when I look back on it, I say it would have been very beneficial to me, and perhaps spared my colleagues a lot of agita if I had that initially and had read through it, because then there might not have been so many references to New Guy, and New Guy could have been getting some work done as opposed to stepping, treading down old paths. So I think you're right, John, that somebody, it's not like, gee, we got to hold your hand and teach you all this stuff. You're all grown up, you're in for public office, here it is. But, oh, by the way, It's the syllabus, read it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important though, especially as they on board, to spend some time talking about what we did the past year. Like I know some of the candidates at least reached out to me to say, hey, haven't been fully tracking, but would love to just understand what's been going on, just to know, so that way they can have some context as they come in of like what's completed or what's still in process. So I think it's just something we all got to think about, like each of us as counselors, like how do we invite, welcome, and be available for new people to really just kind of learn. But also at the same time, I will say, I feel like it was 2 years before I finally figured out what a lot of things. So I think people also have to like know, like, hey, you're not gonna be like, it's like when you start a new job, right? Like you got to have 6 months to just kind of get the lay of the land, and then you'll start to get things, because you might read something the first 6 months and it makes no sense, and then 3 years later you're finally like, I get it.
All
Well,
right, guys, I have another meeting. I
Yeah.
have to end this one. Appointments and negotiations was supposed to start 5 minutes ago, so I'm gonna have to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, Dawn, are you okay? All right, thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
We'll see you later.
I